Yeah, it is time to be able to exit, but there's an orderly exit that's required in this process. And everyone knew that the Taliban was still a lethal force that was out there. We're finding out exactly how lethal that really is. There's about 400 districts in Afghanistan. The Taliban have already retaken 100 of those districts, and they're continuing to be able to encircle the country to be able to move in. We still have prisoners of war that are American prisoners of war to deal with. We still have an American embassy and personnel that's there that still needs to be secured. And we've got really serious intelligence issues that are there. So the key thing in all of this withdrawal is how are we going to monitor real risks that are there? We're in Afghanistan because Al Qaeda launched their attack on the United States from there. That's the reason that we're there. How are we going to monitor to make sure terrorism doesn't rise again and that we make sure all Americans are actually coming home, that we're not leaving anyone behind?
Well, it seems to many that the current administration is so focused on our, frivolous battles here at home, they have turned perhaps a blind eye to the terror and actual dangers advancing around the globe. We just had the report in the Washington Post saying that China is likely building more than 100 missile silos across their desert. That would be a major potential nuclear buildup in the People's Republic of China, referred to as the PRC. Here's what the State Department spokesperson Ned Price said during a briefing this week.
It is concerning. It raises questions about the PRC's intent. And for us, it reinforces the importance of pursuing practical measures to reduce nuclear risks. Despite what appears to be PRC obfuscation, this rapid buildup has become more difficult to hide, and it highlights how the PRC appears, again, to be deviating from decades of nuclear strategy based around minimum deterrence.
So what is really happening around the globe? We have Iran that everybody knows wants to bomb. This administration wants to re-enter into the Iran nuclear agreement. We have at least the British who've been able to recognize that Russia is not our friend. They view Russia nuclear proliferation as the greatest threat to their homeland. Meanwhile, we're giving Putin the pipeline to do what he wants with Germany. And here in China, they are now on the brink of a nuclear buildup themselves. And we still haven't recognized that China means to run the 21st century and actually excise American excellence. How do we get the American people to see what is obvious, that their world is on the march and America under this administration is asleep at the wheel?
No, I think the American people do see it, and I think they understand that this administration is asleep at the wheel, whether it's asleep at the wheel on our border security and opening that up on our southwest border or what's happening around the world. I can't tell you the number of people that have said to me, why did Biden block a pipeline coming in from Canada in the northern United States, but then relieve sanctions to be able to allow the Russians to be able to do that into Western Europe, which will destabilize Western Europe and which will decrease jobs in America, because that means we're not actually exporting that natural gas to Europe. Why did, for instance, President Biden step in and renew the START treaty that President Trump had set aside and said this is a bad treaty with Russia? And if we're going to have another treaty dealing with nuclear weapons, which we should, we need to make sure China is included. Instead, Biden, in his earliest days in office, stepped in and said, no, China's not the problem. Russia's the problem on nuclear weapons, renewed the START treaty immediately with Russia, and then now suddenly turns around 4 months later and said, oh, China's a nuclear problem as well. Maybe we need to figure out some way to be a deterrent to them also. That was already set up by the Trump administration that the Biden team immediately set aside on it. They should have said, we're going to negotiate a treaty dealing with nuclear weapons with China, Russia, and the United States. But they failed to be able to do that. And they're ignoring the nuclear triad that China continues to accelerate, that all of us have seen. But for whatever reason, they over-trusted China in the earliest days. And now they seem to be shocked that China is not actually going to be peaceful in all this process. They're being more aggressive. So, yes, it is a wake-up call when they send money to Iran, that then Iran uses that money to be able to attack Israel using Hamas as their proxy. We're hoping that the Biden team wakes up to Israel, wakes up to Russia, wakes up to China, and that the American people see what's going on.
It's really crazy when America starts treating our allies like enemies and our enemies like allies. We find ourselves in a messy, messy place. But talking about American jobs and America first, the U.S. added about 850,000 jobs, according to the latest jobs report that came out. More than expected. However, unemployment did uptick 1 point from 5.8 to 5.9. And we do know we still have that labor shortage on the backs of Americans being paid to stay at home. What do you think we can do to cut through the white noise steroids to make sure that we get Americans back to the dignity of work and get this economy humming the way we know it should be in the aftermath of these COVID lockdowns?
So about 25 states have already said we're going to deny what Washington, D.C. is throwing money our way to be able to encourage our people to stay home. My state, included in Oklahoma, said, no, thank you. We're not going to take the bribe money from Washington, D.C. to try to keep people at home. We think there's a value in work. It's valuable for families. It's valuable for an economy. And quite frankly, work is not punishment. I'm amazed at my Democrat colleagues. They're like, why would we push people to work on this? Work is not punishment. For those of us that come from a Christian worldview like I do on it, work existed in the Garden of Eden before the fall. Work's not punishment. Work is who we are, and it's how we find purpose and meaning and how we pass on those ethics to the next generation. So we need to find ways to incentivize work. Those states that have then set aside all this free money, quote unquote, coming from Washington, D.C., they're finding their economies are rising and they're strengthening. That's very helpful. For the other state, those unemployment benefits tick off the first week of September. So we've still got months to go of this down economy. And as you may know, in that March, quote unquote, COVID bill, that was a straight Democrat bill of $2 trillion they threw out in the economy. One of the things they also threw into it starts this month was literally sending checks to people at $300 per child every single month. That will also be a disincentive to be able to get back to work as well, when they're literally just getting new checks in the mail.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that COVID relief bill that had very little to do with COVID. Democrats then put forth a actual infrastructure bill that had very little to do with infrastructure. Since then, there has been some type of bipartisan agreement that actually says that we're going to put real money into bridges and tunnels and roads, actual American infrastructure. You remain opposed to the existing infrastructure plan that's been proposed. What are the things you think we can be doing today to make sure that we have the type of investment in infrastructure that's required? Is it perhaps maybe taking money we've already appropriated in these other bloated bills and applying them specifically to the things that we need to get done?
No, it absolutely is. We should do infrastructure. Infrastructure is a basic responsibility of government to be able to do infrastructure. That's what you do, is you do infrastructure, roads, bridges, all those things. That's what government's responsible to do. What Biden has put out there is not infrastructure. He's more concerned about being historic and being an FDR-like figure in history than he is worried about just taking care of what do we need to do, what can we afford to do. So the prime thing right now is, yes, we've got to do infrastructure, but not those packages, not like that. And we're not going to try to tank the American economy while we're, quote unquote, trying to be able to help strengthen the American economy with infrastructure. So taking some of the COVID money that's to be spent from what they put in this March bill, that's not even going to be spent till 22, 23, 24. That's not real COVID money for emergency if you're talking about spending it 2 years after the pandemic's over. Take some of that money, pull it aside. Let's say, let's do real infrastructure with that. Let's not raise taxes on this. They want to do this giant tax increase as well as doing infrastructure. They want to do infrastructure, but they have this definition of infrastructure that's this crazy definition. For instance, one of the things in Biden's infrastructure package is new school lunch trays. Now, we can talk about new school lunch trays. Number one, whether that's a federal responsibility to do it, which it's not. But number two, who considers school lunch trays infrastructure except for the Biden administration? It's just nonsensical, all the things that they throw in to say this is going to be infrastructure. So for all those kids that are out there carrying their school lunch trays, thanks for handling the infrastructure package that you're handling as you're taking your lunch to the table there. But I've got to tell you, let's get back to doing infrastructure that's real infrastructure that American people want to see done. Let's pay for it in a way that actually helps our economy and doesn't put us more into debt. That's what we typically do. Let's actually do the right thing.
I think putting America first has to start by leading with common sense. Senator James Lankford, we appreciate you. Have a blessed 4th of July, my friend, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, bless you and enjoy the day.
All right, coming up next.